In this subdivision surface exercise, we're going to model an object similar to the one you see here in the viewport. And this object was taken from a free kitbash library, and it was not made to be used with subdivision surfaces. If I switch on the lines, you can see why. So this is a plain hard surface model. We are going to try and do this with subdivision surfaces, and as you can see, we have a lot of repetitive detail and a lot of rotational symmetry, and that means we only need to model a very small part of this object. I have already prepared a Cinema 4D file for you. You can download a project folder, and if you open the Cinema 4D file, you will be in the top view and the reference image will already be there. I've also rendered a perspective view of the kitbash model that you can use as further reference if you want to. So let's get down to business. First of all, we need a disk, and the disk only needs one disk segment. And actually we're going to need two disks, so I'm going to make a copy, and one of these will be big, the other one will be small. For the big disk we need quite a few rotation segments, and I'm going for 60 here. Let's increase the outer radius to here, and you can see why we need so many segments here. If we create the cutouts, we have 2 polygons left to give us a small curve here, so that's the minimum of polygons that we need to get a little bit of curvature here. I'm also going to create an inner radius. I'm going to make this about this big, and the small disk, we can take this and move it up to here. Let's make this a little bit smaller, and I'm going to center it on this circular detail here, and then we can make it bigger again. And right now we have too many rotation segments for the small disk. We need to find something that matches the geometry of the big disk. So we have to reduce the rotation segments here. Let's see, I think 16 should work. Since we're going to need these disks again, I'm going to make a copy of both of these. Now let's take the big disk and make it editable. Before we start moving points around and match the geometry up with the geometry of the small disk, we have to add more edge loops to the big disk in order to create the geometry for the details at the center. If we start moving points around the way this disk is now, we're going to change the width of the segments and we're not going to get something that is circular. So let's switch to edge mode, and I'm going to use the ring selection tool to select these edges, and then I'm going to use edge cut with one subdivision, and I'm going to slide these edges to about here, and we're going to repeat this process a couple of times. So ring selection, select these edges, edge cut to create another loop like this, and we need some edges here and down here. So in point mode I'm going to use the slide tool, and I'm going to slide this point over to the edge of the smaller disk here. And then we can select this point here, switch on snapping, and move it down to here, snap it to this point, and I'm going to snap this point down to this point of the smaller disk. So in polygon mode, I'm going to select these polygons here now, hit UI on the keyboard to invert the selection and delete these polygons. And now we need to get rid of all of these points, so either select everything or deselect everything, and then optimize the object. Next I'm going to create the geometry for the outer details here, and we can reuse this small disk here. I'll just get rid of this one. I'm going to make this disk a little bit smaller, match it up with the reference image like this. And let's select the big disk and increase the outer radius to about here and the inner radius to about here. We need to combine the small disk with the big disk, and we can't use the bool object because these are both flat objects, so we can't subtract them from each other. So in order to be able to combine these objects, I'm going to add a cylinder, and I'm going to snap it to the center of the small disk, and it has to have the same radius and the same segments as the small disk. And now we can put the big disk in a bool object, make the cylinder the second child of the bool object, and I want to create a single object and hide the new edges. And let's make this editable. Select these points here, UI to invert the selection, and delete all of these points here. Let's make the small disk editable. Go to polygon mode, select all the polygons, hit I for extrude inner, and I'm going to make one extrusion like this and another one like this. I'm going to scale this down a little bit further to about here maybe. Let's go ahead and delete half of this disk. I'm going to select both of these objects and use connect objects and delete to combine them. And let's get rid of these tags, we don't really need these. So select these 2 points now, and I'm going to use the weld tool to weld them to this point. Up here I'm going to weld these 2 points, and in edge mode I'm going to select these 2 edges, connect them. In point mode I'll connect these 2 points, and that doesn't seem to work, which is probably because we have more points than we need. If I select this one, you can see we actually have 2 points here. Just going to optimize, and now if I try and connect them, this should work perfectly fine. Now we can go ahead and select both of these objects and turn them into a single object. And this is going to be our segment base mesh. Next I'm going to use the polygon pen, hold down Control, left click and drag on this edge down here to extrude it out, and I'm going to weld it to this edge. I'm going to repeat this a couple of times to close all of these holes here. So now we have this flat object, and this is all of the geometry that we need, so we can now start and turn this into a 3-dimensional object. Switch to polygon mode. I'm going to select these polygons here at the back, use D for extrude, and I'm going to extrude this up maybe 10 centimeters. Deselect these polygons, extrude again, and I'm going to deselect these ones here and extrude one more time. And next I'm going to clean up the geometry a little bit by deleting these polygons here. And these ones over here. And we can also get rid of these edges here. So I'm going to select them and then use dissolve to get rid of these. If you switch to point mode, you can see we need to optimize the object, so I'm going to deselect everything and use optimize. Next I'm going to extrude these polygons here. You know what, I'm just going to delete the center for now. So select these polygons, Let's extrude these up, and I'll make this an offset of maybe, let's do 20, and then select these polygons here and extrude these up maybe 15. And again, let's do a bit of cleanup by deleting this polygon over here and these ones. Dissolve these edges here, and again optimize the object. If you take a look at the reference image in the top view, you can see we have this curve that transitions into this circular shape here. And if I put our object in a subdivision surface object, you can see we're getting a much sharper curve here. So we don't really have the geometry to create this soft transition. So what I'll do here is I'll just delete this point, and then I'm going to use the polygon pen tool to close the holes like this. And this will give us two triangles. We're going to take care of those a little bit later. Actually, we're going to get rid of this one right away. So let's go back to the top view. I'm going to move some points around. So we can select these ones here and line them up a little bit better with the reference image. It's going to change the circular shape down here a little bit, but it won't be noticeable on the finished object. I do want to make sure that we get a nice and soft curve going here. Same up here. I'm going to move these points over to here maybe. And now we can use the knife tool. I have visible only switched on here, and I'm in single line mode, which is my default for the knife tool. And we can make a cut like this, and then select this point and move it over to about here maybe. And now we can dissolve this edge, which will give us a four-sided polygon. I want the width of these two segments here to be a little more even, which should hopefully give us a more even curve here. So I'm going to select these edges here and then use the slide tool. Let's go to the top view. I'm going to slide these over a little bit to about here. Next, I'm going to select these edges here and extrude them down a bit. Maybe let's move these down a little bit further, and then we can select these edges here, and I'm going to use the bevel tool in chamfer mode, and let's add a chamfer here. So I'll do maybe 5 centimeters here. We also need to chamfer some more edges. You can see here these darker areas represent slanted surfaces. So we're going to create these by selecting these edges here and then using the bevel tool in chamfer mode to create these surfaces like this. And we also need to do this down here. So I'm going to select these edges and chamfer them as well. The last thing I want to do before I start adding the control edges is I want to close this hole. So I'm going to put our object in a symmetry object, make the symmetry editable. And I'm going to select the edges here at the bottom, move these up a little bit, and then use close polygon hole to close this hole here. And in order to get rid of this n-gon, I'm going to select it and then isolate it by hiding the unselected polygons. And in point mode, I'm going to connect some of these points here. And then use the line cut tool Make sure you have visible only switched on, because if you haven't, you could accidentally cut into the polygons that are hidden. And I'm going to make a few cuts like this. And then we can select these points here and use the brush tool. I'm going to set this to smooth. Just left click and drag in a viewport until the points stop moving. And I'm going to scale these a little bit further to get evenly sized polygons here. Let's go back to polygon mode and unhide everything. And now we can go back to the top view, and I'm going to delete half of this object again. And let's just select the points here at the center to make sure they are all at 0 on the axis, which they aren't. So I'm going to move these to the center. So this is the finished base geometry. I'm going to make a backup copy of this object. And now we can start adding the control edges that we need to make those corners a little sharper. Usually what I would do is I would select the edges that I want to bevel, and then use the bevel tool in solid mode. And for this one we could do an offset of maybe 2. I tend to make these corners not too sharp because I do want a little bit of an organic look. But in this case I want to do this a little bit differently, and the reason is because this is going to be a pretty high poly object. We have to mirror the base mesh, we have to copy it around 10 times, and we also have to use symmetry top to bottom. So in this case I'm going to try and be a little more reasonable about the number of polygons that I want to use. So I'm going to do a lot of these bevels, like I said, a little bit differently. So what I will do here is select these edges, use the bevel tool, and make the bevel a little bit tighter or smaller. And in order to save polygons, I'm going to select these 2 loops here and just dissolve them. And if I subdivide this, it's going to be a little bit softer, but if you render it, you can hardly see a difference. Now these do look a little bit sharper. So if you want this look over here, you will have to keep these additional edges, but I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to remove them from a lot of these corners that we're going to bevel. So let's continue with these edges here. I'm going to use the same settings as before, and then just remove these edge loops here. And over here I'm just going to ring select these edges and use edge cut and put a loop here. So let's select more edges and bevel them. We can select all of these ones here and these ones over here as well. So again, let's bevel these, and you can see the problem we're getting down here. I'm just going to switch the mithering of the bevel tool to uniform, and that should fix that problem here. So now let's go ahead and remove some of these edges again. Over here in this corner we're having a bit of a problem. You can see the control edges here, and if I subdivide the object, you can see that the control edge gets pulled away from the corner quite a bit. And if I render this, it's going to look like this. So this area here is getting a lot softer than the area over here. And in order to prevent that from happening, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these edges and use the slide tool. And if I hold down Control, I can clone these edges. And I'm going to create an additional edge loop like this. And now if I subdivide this object, the second edge gets pulled out a little bit, but our control edge stays in place. And if I render this, you can see the difference here. This one is much softer and this one is a lot tighter. Now let's select these edges over here and again use the bevel tool as before, and here I'm going to remove this edge loop over here. For the other edges, we're going to create edge loops on both sides of the corner because the distance between this point up here, for example, and this point down here is too big, and our corner would look much too soft if we removed these edge loops. So let's go ahead and select these edges here and these ones and these ones over here and bevel them. I'm going to bring the offset up a little bit to 2. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so I think that's pretty nice. And next let's select these edges here and these ones and this one and these ones, and we should be able to bevel these with uniform mitering. Let's go ahead and try that, and this looks good. I think if I subdivide this, we're getting something like this, and over here we're getting a really nice and clean transition from this part into the circular shape here. Just going to unbreak the Phong shading because this edge up here looked a little bit strange. Still looks a bit strange. Let's check the Phong tag. And 40 may not be enough here. 40 is the default of the Phong angle. Let's bring this up to 89. And you can see the edge change here, and now this should look a lot better. So I think this is looking pretty good. We're following the shape of the reference image quite well here. The only thing we still need to change is this corner here and this one over here. On our object, these corners are still much too soft and we have sharp corners. You can see this over here and over here in the reference image. So we need to create some additional geometry to sharpen these corners. So I'm going to use the knife tool, and this time I'm going to switch off visible only, and let's start with this corner. I'm going to make a cut like this, and let's make another cut over here, and I'm going to make another cut over here and one over here. And in order to get rid of the n-gons that we've created here, I'm going to cut from this point over to this one. Let's make a cut from this point to here and one cut like so. And now we can dissolve this edge and this one, and we get four-sided polygons here and a sharp corner. Let's go ahead and do the same thing in this corner here. Oh, before I do, actually, I want to get rid of this triangle up here. And there's two ways we can turn this into a four-sided polygon. One would be to select these edges here and connect them, and then connect these 2 points and dissolve this edge. So this would turn this into a four-sided polygon. The other way would be to connect these edges here and then use the slide tool and just slide this point over a bit like so, and this creates 1 or 2 polygons more than the first version I showed you. I'm just going to stick with this one. And over here, while we're at it, I'm going to dissolve these edges here, select these edges, and use edge cut with 3 subdivisions just to spread out the geometry a little more evenly over here. So let's go back to sharpening this corner. I'm going to use the knife tool again, make a cut here, another one here, and resolve these n-gons by adding 3 cuts like this. And now we can dissolve this edge and get 4-sided polygons in this area here. I'm going to slide this one over a little bit, maybe this one as well, and maybe this one. Let's move this over to about here. Now we still have n-gons here and up here, so we're going to remove these next. In this corner here, I don't want to connect this point to this one down here. We would get a very narrow and very stretched polygon. So what I'll do here is I'll select these edges and connect them, and now connect these points, dissolve this edge and select these 2 edges here and slide them up a little bit like so. Maybe slide this edge back down a little bit, and let's go ahead and select these edges here and slide those over a little bit. Deselect this one and slide these edges to over here. And up here what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another cut. I'm going to switch on visible only again, and I'll make the cut from this point here over to about here. Let's go to point mode, connect these 2 points, get rid of this edge by dissolving it, and I'm going to slide this point over to about here. And we have 1 n-gon left, which is this one over here. And in order to get rid of that, I'm going to select these edges here and connect them, and then connect these 2 points. So if I switch to polygon mode, we only have 4-sided polygons. If I go to my special selections and select all quadrangles, you can see we get a selection of 267 out of 267, which means it's all quads now. I'm going to rename this object to segment control edges base. I'm calling it base because we still haven't created the last detail, which is this opening here. So let's make a backup copy. And now we can use a symmetry object to mirror this segment over left to right. Let's make this editable, and I'm going to put this object in a cloner object. First of all, just let me check if the object axis is at the center, which it is. And for the cloner, I'm going to use radial mode on the XZ plane. We'll need 10 copies and no radius. In order to connect all of these clones and weld the points at the seams, I'm going to put the cloner in a connect object. Let's make this editable, subdivide, and see how that looks. And I think that's looking pretty good. So we can go ahead and create these openings. And I don't really like the position of these openings, so what I'm going to do to change that position is I'm going to my viewport settings, to the back tab where the reference image is. You can see it's rotated by 18 degrees. I'm just going to rotate this back to 0, which will change the position of these openings. And as for the shape of these openings, I want the ends to be a little bit rounder, so that means we have to add additional geometry. I'm going to use the ring selection to select these edges here and connect them, and then we can use the slide tool to slide this point over to here a little bit. And I'm going to slide this point down to here. Next I'm going to delete parts of the object. Optimize. And let's select these polygons here. And I'm going to extrude these down a bit. And delete them, optimize again. And in edge mode I'm going to use the loop selection tool to select these edges here. Let's bevel them with an offset of 1. And I'm going to select this edge loop here and dissolve these edges. So I think that's looking pretty good. Next, what I want to do is go to model mode, and I'm going to use mesh axis center to put the axis at the bottom of this object, and we also should move the axis over on the x-axis and all the way down on the z-axis to put the axis at the center. Next I'm going to use two symmetry objects, and one of these has to be XY on the mirror plane. Let's make this editable. I'm going to move the object to the floor. Let's just check. Let's go to edge mode. I'm going to select these edges here and these ones down here. I should have done that before, because now we have to select a lot more edges. And I'll make sure that these are at 0 on the y-axis, and the size on the y-axis also needs to be 0. So let's put this in another symmetry object. We're going to mirror this top to bottom, so we need to change the mirror plane of the symmetry to XZ. Let's put this back into our subdivision surface object, and we're done. If you need both sides of the object and you want to save more polygons, just make the symmetry editable and remove the edge loops here at the center, here at the center of these holes, and on the outside of the object. So you can see we created a pretty nice looking object. It's a bit high poly, but it has nice and clean geometry. So that's it for this exercise. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching everyone, and take care.